Welcome, everybody. I am Tom Philpott. I am the food and agriculture blogger for Mother Jones, and I help run a small farm in North Carolina called Maverick Farms. And I am very happy to have been invited to assemble this panel to talk about the question of food and the environment, which is a question that I don't think really 10 or 15 years ago was very much on people's minds. I think when people thought about the environment, they thought about other things, driving and burning fossil fuels in a more direct way. And it's been amazing to see over the past 10 or 15 years, people start to realize that their food choices and the food system that we have has an incredible environmental footprint. And the people on this panel have been very innovative in addressing that issue, identifying that issue, getting the message out about it, and in some cases acting directly, being directly involved in the food system, in the food business, of bringing that to the fore, educating people about it, and innovating new ways of doing things. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel and then start asking them questions. And the goal here is to generate a conversation. And as you guys are part of that conversation, and so it's at a certain point in the discussion, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Let me start. I'm going in completely random order, and I'm going to start with Chris Ellen, who is sitting right there. And Chris is most known for his work as director of Meatless Monday, which was a campaign to try to get people to, think about their food consumption, their meat consumption, and to, think of a fun way and a systematic way to cut it down. It's gotten a lot of attention, and it's been very effective. Chris is now working for Robbie Kenner, he's on the panel, and we'll introduce him in a second. Chris has a very interesting background. He was a writer and producer at MTV, and produced a music show called Alternative Nation, and he's also launched an art magazine. So he's had kind of an interesting career. And then sitting to Chris's right is Helene York from a very important company called BAMCO, which is a institutional catering company. Mark Bittman of the New York Times called, the full name of it is Bon Appetit Management Company. People would call it BAMCO in the industry. And Mark Bittman of the Times has called it the most principled food service company in the nation. It's very well known for, back in the 90s when the local food movement, sustainable food movement, hadn't gotten much traction, 5 years before the publication of Omnivore's Dilemma, they were sourcing local in their various, they began an effort to source local in the various cafeterias. It's been very successful. Helene is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Bon Appetit, and she's also the Director of the Bon Appetit Management Company Foundation. And then on the far left of the panel is Lori David. Lori David is a very important and high-profile climate activist in this country. Some of you may have seen an obscure documentary called An Inconvenient Truth. Lori was a producer of that movie. She's been a producer for a while. She produced, pardon me here, she's produced a lot of various different things, and she's been called the Bono of climate activism by Vanity Fair magazine. And right to her right is another filmmaker, and that is Robbie Kenner, who's produced probably the most important and well-known food documentary that we've ever had, and that is his film Food Inc. that most of you have probably seen. And Food Inc. is, the thing about Food Inc. that I found most impressive, that I've had conversations with completely random people on airplanes who who've asked me what I do, and I start mumbling something about how I write about food politics, and they say, oh, like, is that like that Food Inc. thing? I saw that on PBS. And they'll explain about how, they'll start talking to me about how they started thinking about their food consumption, they started thinking about their fast food habit. You know, wasn't it gross when they were putting that pink slime into meat in the movie? They'll tell me things like that. And I think that that movie has done a really masterful job, and the way that it got traction and the way that it got shown outside of sort of art house circles that documentaries usually get relegated to, has really been able to, what people call, speak outside of the choir, which is kind of pretty much everybody's goal, and it's really, really hard to do. And I think that Food Inc. Succeeded dramatically in doing that. And to Robbie's right is a woman from the family that makes the amazing cereal Nature's Path, G.O.D. Stevens. A couple years ago, when I was working at Grist Magazine, we did a blind tasting. I led a blind tasting of cereals to figure out what was the best organic cereal, and I believe that all the winners were Nature's Path products. There was a bit of dissension on which ones were better. Some people on the panel liked more of the kiddie ones. I preferred more of the sort of serious Flax Plus kinds. But I think they are, definitely the best organic cereals in the market. And Jody is a third-generation family farmer. Nature's Path is a family company. Her parents founded it in the 80s in Canada. And Jody serves as Director of Human Resources and Sustainability for Nature's Path. And so what I want to get you guys talking about, and I'm going to call on you randomly. There's going to be no order. I'm going to get you, what I want you to start off by talking about is, what is the environmental issue that that first caught your, the food-related environmental issue that first caught your attention and really started bothering you, and how did you react to that? What things have you done in your work, in your professional life, to start addressing that? Why don't we start with Robbie?
Thanks, Tom. For me, I hadn't really thought about food and the environment. I love to eat. My wife's a wonderful cook, and my friends are good cooks, so that was always something I enjoyed, but I hadn't thought too much about where our food comes from. And then I read Eric Schlosser's book, Fast Food Nation, and thought it would be really interesting to make a film about where our food comes from and what's in it and what it does to us. And I was surprised at how off limits our food system was. I had no idea about that when I started to make the film. I had made a film prior to Food Inc. where we spoke to, it was about the Vietnam War, and we spoke to all these different people, about 60 different people who represented all different sides of the issues. And I found people who I totally disagreed with were people I really learned to sympathize with and see the issues very differently. And I thought, okay, we could do a film like that about food. And it turned out to be the absolute opposite situation. There was just a wall shut down. People had no interest in, people being industrial food makers did not want us thinking about where our food came from. And the more they didn't want us thinking about it, the more I began to think, this is really vital, this is really important. And I think we as citizens have to start to think about what's in our food and what it's doing to us, what it's doing to our children, and what it's doing to our planet.
And Robbie, as you were in the process of, sort of on that journey making the film, what was the most surprising thing that you found?
Well, ultimately, what was most surprising, I mean, we knew that CAFOs are not pleasant places, and I was surprised how, in the film we say there are about 10 companies that didn't want to speak to us. In reality, there were probably 100 companies, and we went to chicken farmers. We probably spoke to 100 chicken farmers, and they wanted to talk, but they were fearful that they would lose their occupation. So how fearful this industry makes people was interesting. But I think it was one of our first days of shooting where I went to film Eric going to talk at a hearing on whether we should label cloned meat. So to begin with, cloned meat was kind of a surprise. I hadn't really thought about that before. Not something that seemed that appetizing. But when the representative from the meat industry stood up and said, I really don't think the consumer should have that kind of information. It's too confusing for them, that I began to realize this is an issue that transcends food. It's really about our rights. I always thought we live in a free country. It's a free market, and the free market should be, if you have a good product, you should want to advertise it. And what's happened now is that people are keeping, companies are keeping information off the labels, and that to me was a huge, terrifying surprise.
Lori, why don't you pipe in and tell us, how, so you were involved in the making of Inconvenient Truth. How did you pivot over to become so interested in food, and what is the environmental impact of food that really kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, I was for a long time working on global warming issues, and then I was just 2 years ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table being a mom to my teenage daughters, and I had this epiphany that every single issue that I care about, the environment, the health of my kids, crosses the dinner plate. And that as an individual, I had a lot of power. And what we're eating, how we're eating it, where we're buying it, when we're buying it, what we're wasting, these are all huge environmental issues. Even, global warming. Are you practicing meatless Mondays? How much meat are we eating? Are we eating meat 3 times a day as opposed to 3 times a week like we used to be? This is a global warming issue. And here's something that I can have control over. My own practices in my own house. And then, of course, the other epiphany is that the kitchen is the greenest room in your house to practice these values and teach them to your kids. And so as a result of that particular epiphany, also the fact that my teenage daughters were actually talking to me at the table, I realized I had done something right, and that was to have this very simple ritual. This seems like a strange digression, but this is really what it came down to me, is that by having family dinner every night, I was sort of practicing what I'm preaching, and I could help other people do it, because people, unfortunately, this ritual is falling by the wayside. Our lifestyles are causing everybody to eat on the run, or eat in the car, or eat in front of a television, and now we have this, unbelievable explosion of obesity and diabetes, and of course all the environmental issues as a result of how we're raising meat. But that the practice of family dinner, this is something we can all do. We can recapture this, and we can get all the benefits of it. We could sit down, we can start cooking again, which is a huge piece of this. This is such a simple solution, but it is a huge piece of the problem. Half of everything we're eating is takeout, and all the implications of that, and how food's being packaged. So anyway, I put all this, I realized I was doing something right as a parent, and I put it all into this book called The Family Dinner with tons of amazing recipes, and now I'm focused on food issues as a result.
This is a wonderful book.
Thank you. Thank you.
I forgot to mention in my intro. Chris, Lori mentioned meat in her, as something that kind of motivated her to think about food and the environment. Talk us through the relationship between meat consumption and the environment. Why do you want us to cut down on meat? Why do you want us not to eat meat on Mondays?
Well, there's a raft of data that I don't have my little fingertips here. Let me speak to, perhaps answer an earlier question. I was, how did I come to this? If allow me, it'll circle back. Earth Day 2009, Michael Pollan was on Oprah. And Oprah asked Michael, what's the one thing that people can do at home that'll have the greatest impact on reducing their carbon footprint? Again, as Tom mentioned, I just come from the sort of television world, knew nothing about this area. So I was listening, what would Michael say? What's the one thing? And he sat back in his chair and answered, cut back on meat 1 day a week, like I do with my family. And that both had a huge impact on the Meatless Monday movement. It was really the first step to get this national exposure. This is really 2 years ago, and now Meatless Monday sort of finds itself everywhere. And Michael's had a lot to do with that. But then I, listened to Michael, and I began to do look at the numbers, and it is staggering, the amount of water and the amount of fuel and the amount of resources that are required to bring meat to the table. So I can only thoroughly agree with Michael. And then maybe to Lori's point, what we try to do, and again, I think it all connects, it is such a complex issue. Food and the environment are always done such a great job in consolidating that. What we try to do at Meatless Monday, and perhaps why it's such a success, is we make it very simple, and we perhaps oversimplify it, but we encourage people to do this thing 1 day a week. And it's simple, doable, it's non-threatening, it's positive, and with that, and people come to me from all areas of the kind of food movement, environmental, animal rights, worker rights, and with all these different issues, the one thing people can do is cut back on meat, because it all connects, sort of. That answers your question.
Jody, so your family started that company in the 80s, and clearly there had been an environmental movement, and people had been thinking about food a little bit, nothing like they are today, but there had been books like Francis Moore LePay's book of Diet for a Small Planet. What was going through, if you can, you were probably a little kid, but what were your parents thinking? How did they get the idea of starting an organic food company? And to go back to my original question, what problem were they trying to address? What were they thinking about?
Sure. My dad grew up on a farm, a berry farm on Vancouver Island, and his dad had sort of experimented with different types of farming techniques. He started off farming basically organically, and then he experimented with chemicals, saw the effect that it had on the soil, and stopped using them. And he started mulching with sawdust, using seaweed to fertilize the soil, and this had a really profound impact on my dad. And
what did he farm? Was it wheat?
Pardon me?
Was he farming wheat, or what was he farming up there?
He was farming berries, raspberries, blueberries,
okay,
blackberries. They had a farm stand called Goldstream Berry Paradise. And so he told my dad to always leave the soil better than you found it. And it had a profound impact on him, and this was a thread throughout all the businesses that he started, including starting one of Canada's first natural food stores to founding Nature's Path. And at the time, we were the first company to make third-party certified organic food, and the reason why the company was founded was to help leave the soil better than you found it. And over the years, we've kind of evolved that message to leaving the earth better than you found it. One big issue that's deeply concerning to us as a company is the continued proliferation of genetically engineered ingredients, both from a pollution standpoint of view, farmers having to add more and more pesticides to keep these GE ingredients going, introducing new seeds all the time, like GE alfalfa, and the push to introduce GE wheat. So that's something that really keeps me up at night and is concerning to us as a company.
And basically at this point, if you're going to buy breakfast cereal and it's not organic, it's going to have genetically modified ingredients between the grains that go into it, the sugar, with genetically modified sugar beets now dominating the sugar industry in the United States. Helene, why don't you tell us how you started to think about, and how Bon Appetit Management, what was the journey of the company and your journey thinking about the food and the environment?
Sure. We're a restaurant company in 31 states, but The name is probably not familiar to most of you because we're institutional restaurants. So colleges and corporations hire us, and we hire the chefs and give the chefs standards and guidelines on what they can serve their customers. But ultimately, they decide what is on the menu every day. We give them that freedom, which actually is quite rare in institutional food. In 2005, I saw a movie. Movie's very influential in my thinking, Future of Food. And it occurred to me then that we have a very serious problem coming down the pike with all of the petroleum in our food system in so many different ways, from fossil fuel-based fertilizers to transportation, to different kinds of transportation, to excessive energy in the production of foods. I thought at the time packaging was a big deal, but in fact it's turned out that it's a much, much smaller deal than many other things like meat consumption. But we developed a program in 2005, 2006 called the Low Carbon Diet. Many of you, of course, are interested in climate change and where we're at and concerned about it. I can tell you, you all know this, in 2006, most people had no idea what climate, in the United States, what climate change was. Our influential movies and other public debates weren't quite out there at that time. But we followed this program, which we actually started implementing in 2007, and we cut our beef purchases by 1/3 in 2 years. We cut our cheese purchases. We eliminated tropical fruit, which often comes, it's not seasonal, it's not local, it's not regional, by 50%. And try taking bananas away from college students. It's a difficult task. It's almost as bad as trying to take away breakfast cereal, which once we actually didn't allow students to have breakfast cereal for dinner one night, and we got death threats, let me tell you. But with all of this, and we do a lot of messaging to our guests. We serve 120 million meals a year. But before I answer this question, let me ask you, how many of you, raise your hands, shop at farmers markets, buy organic, consider yourself part of like the good food movement? Okay, we've got about 100 people in the audience and about 110 people raised your hands. Thank you very much. What keeps me up at night is that we are singing to the choir, okay? Every one of you, thank you for coming. And I think that singing to the choir is very important because we get the same tune down, we learn from each other, we go out and we work with the rest of the community. But most of people are not as engaged in food as we are, any one of us. They're interested in flavor, convenience, price. They're interested in value, which is usually how much can I get for how little. And so a lot of the messages that I care about very deeply, environmental issues, are not reaching the public. And it's going to take time, I recognize that. But what we do internally as a company is that we have 2 captive audiences. One are our chefs. We have about 500 chefs who are the choice editors. We give them the goals, we give them the standards, we don't tell them how to get there, but they're the ones who've achieved the 3rd reduction, or the 33% reduction in beef. And so if we communicate to them the importance of these environmental messages, of these social messages, and what they are working toward, then they're the ones actually doing the work, and they feel proud of it, and they feel like they're part of something much bigger than themselves. The other audience that we speak to are our suppliers. Tom mentioned we've had a commitment to local food that extends back into the 90s. 1998, 99, we started buying from small, regional, and artisan producers, where this is something that we have not, the rest of the industry is just beginning to start with this, and they're still not interested so much in small producers. They're interested in, quote, local, but not necessarily smaller. So our chefs have a hard and fast requirement to buy 20% of their food from a category we call farm to fork. Well, we also buy from, that means we buy 80%, or not quite 80% because we've exceeded our goals, but a good percentage from other suppliers. And as a company that buys or that serves 120 million meals a year, we have a little bit of influence, not monopoly power by any stretch of the imagination, but we have some suppliers who are now coming to the table and saying, okay, we want to keep on being your supplier. What do we need to do? And so we're able to discuss with them about humane certifications, the valid ones versus the invalid ones. We're able to talk about waste treatment for animal husbandry programs. We're able to talk to a number of things. So what keeps me up at night is that I know there is a vast untapped audience of people that I know needs to get these issues and really embody them, engage with it. But I do sleep eventually, and I sleep knowing my satisfaction comes from I have audiences that I can help inspire to really communicate what are the better things on the next level.
Well, can I
sure.
ask you a question? It's so, when you hear good news, when you hear a company doing something right and well, like Nature's Path and you, I mean, it gives everybody the energy to keep going forward because there's so much bad news. So I'm just blown away by what you guys are accomplishing. Is part of your messaging to the students also, and are you allowed to do in the cafeterias? Are you allowed to start doing signage and all that? Are you allowed to do that?
Yeah, the answer is yes and yes. We have a low-carbon diet day that we only do once a year. We try to make it seamless otherwise, so people are encouraged to buy food that they really like and sort of form their palates to enjoy foods that have less meat in them or that have alternatives to beef. And I don't want to just pick on beef. Obviously, we have a lot of pasture beef producers that we work with as well, some that we have no beef. We've just cut it back quite a bit. But we do signage and really ramp it up one day a year. And we get plenty of pushback, but we also get a lot of support. We are hosting a TEDx event on farm worker rights in October 14th, and we are hosting 500 viewing parties on that day. And anyone can host a viewing party for TEDx. It's TEDx Fruitvale, if anyone wants to look that up. But at our accounts, we are hosting viewing parties. And the idea is really to get at the nuances. I mean, I guess one of the things that I've really learned over the past 10 years or so is that there isn't always one right answer. We have 300 plus million people in this country, and it's not my job to say your right diet is this, right? And we have different needs, we have different cultural traditions and so forth, different ages, but there is a realm in which I think all of us would like to move the American diet. And if we have more of those nuanced conversations, I think that just brings more people in. I will tell you that in the past 6 years, the number of college students who have become interested in food issues has grown exponentially. It's still a small number, but it is much, much more significant than what it used to be.
And also the fact that chefs are like the new rock stars, and that there's more chefs on morning shows now than there are weathermen, and so this is all, and festivals like this, which are, becoming more prevalent.
Right, but now they're putting bacon in ice cream.
Yeah, well, that's upsetting. That's upsetting.
And I think it's clear from what Helene just said that the choir is growing, and I think that we're not the only ones that have noticed that, but the food industry and some of the more powerful forces of the food industry have noticed that too, and we're seeing this kind of organized backlash And we've seen it before. We saw it in tobacco, and we see it most prominently and effectively with climate change, where we've got the science around climate change is clear, it's happening, you can almost see it now, and yet there's no political response. The political response to it is essentially zero, even with the Democrat in the White House. And so I want to ask you guys, most of you are essentially communicators, and we have a huge communication problem in speaking outside the choir, growing the choir, and also how to figuring out how to respond to this sort of campaign of sowing doubt and disinformation in the public about the food system. And why don't we start with Lori? Talk about.
I would say, first of all, yes, we have communication issues, but I think there's a bigger problem than that, and that is that there's so much misinformation that's purposely placed out into the marketplace. So it's not just that we're not coming up with great messaging or figuring out ways to tell the truth. It's that there's an opposition that is spending more money than we could ever spend on lies and on false information. So that's what you're up against. I mean, you're up against that. That's a tough thing to do. And I think it's really interesting, and I don't think that people have paid too much attention to this yet, but I think they will. What Al Gore did the other day in his Climate Reality Project, where he went, basically, he decided not to go through normal channels, right? He did a 24-hour on the internet day, 24 hours around the world, doing a updated version of his PowerPoint, which we made the Film and Inconvenient Truth on. He now has a new version of that. He trained all these people around the world to deliver it, and they went live 24 hours on the internet to get the truth out there. Not because if he was trying to, he's not going to spend the money that the oil industry is spending or the coal industry. So the key is really how do we come up with new ideas, new ways to get the truth out there. And that is the challenge. But we're the worst informed people in the world, this country, I think.
But I think we ultimately have to go to consumers. Food is easier than climate, even though they're really both the same thing. That we ultimately, consumers have a lot more power. And I think looking at the growth hormone with the milk, ultimately people complained to Walmart and they decided to take the milk with the growth hormone off the shelves, and eventually Monsanto had to sell their company because consumers decided they didn't want it anymore. And I think that we as consumers have to start flexing those muscles, whether we have to stop buying meat with antibiotics in it, because we can help make these companies change. It's hard to go up against these companies with the hundreds of millions of dollars that they use to maintain the status quo.
Well, the food dye is a perfect example of what you're saying, right? Yeah. So moms in England said, we don't want food dye in our macaroni and cheese, and so Kraft put out macaroni and cheese without food dye. Yeah. We haven't done that in the United States, so guess what? We have food dye and chemicals in those products. But if we have to start pushing up against the companies, and that's the power of the purchase. And
these companies ultimately will, out of fear of losing customers, will change. So we can make them change, and we have to. But they don't want to, they are fighting to they don't want to take into account the externalities, the things, the destruction of the water, the destruction of the land. Yeah. But we as consumers have to sort of push them.
On the specific question of organics, I read a lot out there about what's being said, and you'll hear columnists at very high-profile publications saying that organic isn't better for citing no real good science, and there's good science the other way and all this stuff, but organic isn't better for the environment. It isn't better for people. And in fact, it's going to starve the world. If by buying organic, we're contributing to the starvation of the world. How does your company, Nature's Path, respond to that? This sort of backlash against suddenly you're trying to put out some organic cereal, and you're essentially being accused of starving the world.
Well, it's just not true. And I think the UN published a study not too long ago looking at 114 farms in Africa and that were using organic or agroecological farming principles, and they found that the yields actually increased by 116%. So what we try to do is educate people, use our packaging to tell our message. We have a lot of information about organic agriculture on our packaging. Supporting communication initiatives. You know, there are a lot of great ways that people can get involved. Say, right here in California, if GMOs are a really important issue to you, there's a ballot initiative that's trying to sort of go through to mandatory label products that have GMOs on it. And if you want to learn more, I would encourage you to go to labelgmos.org. It comes down to having the freedom, you know, what you were talking about before. And in Europe, there's mandatory labeling for products that have GMOs. And so why can't we do that here?
And people aren't buying them in Europe because they're labeled.
So.
And Chris, you know, probably in your days at Meatless Monday, you experienced some backlash from the meat industry. I know that it's not a popular idea.
An immense backlash. Right after Michael gave his big two-sentence announcement on Oprah, a few weeks later, the entire Baltimore public school system went Meatless Monday, which was a great victory for the campaign. But then a few weeks later, we had stories in ABC, on Fox, and saying that these school systems were taking protein out of kids' mouths. And of course, it was a great story and not true by any measure. So there was that. But I think perhaps in response to some things that Lori and Robbie were saying, there are some good signs, at least from my little perch. Companies like Morningstar are coming to Meatless Monday and saying, how can we work with you? Burger King, because they have a veggie burger, and they're coming to Meatless Monday and say, how can we work with you? Of course, they want to use this idea to sell more burgers, but at least they are seeing changes and want to sort of use these communication techniques but there are some signs that there is some promise ahead.
And Helene, you know, I'm sure you guys aren't maybe the most popular company with Smithfield Foods and some of the big meat purveyors.
Just to name a company, yeah.
Not to name any companies, but how do you guys deal with the backlash? And do you get that? Do you ever get that from students? Do you ever get students saying that, you know, do you see organized pushback from students on what you're doing on your campuses?
When we had our first low-carbon diet day, the students at one all-boys school in Indiana boycotted lunch. I mean, they just boycotted it, and they put a barbecue on the front lawn outside of the cafeteria. They ended up later in the day coming back with flowers for all the kitchen workers because they realized that they had done something that was disrespectful of the workers. But we do get, I would say we have a lot of uninformed questions, more than we get backlash now. We don't serve any farmed salmon. We think it's unethical and not healthy. But we did a campaign about a year ago saying why we don't serve farmed salmon, and we definitely got some backlash on that for similar reasons. So you're taking away an important protein source, and we've got to feed the world. Well, I don't think we need to feed the world with farmed salmon, but you know, it's interesting, and let me just point out something Robbie said about Walmart and RBGH. I find this to be a big contradiction, and that is that it's really only Walmart that has the power to really unilaterally change a lot in the food system. And I'd venture to say that there's probably not many of us in the room who actually buys their produce and their food from Walmart. And if we're not there, then how do we help them make that change? You mentioned a company, I won't, but perhaps it was that same company that we're really working with to try to change their animal husbandry practices. And they said, we will do whatever you want us to do if you want to pay for that special system to raise those animals. You know, there are sort of interesting nuances to all of this, because a food service company buys certain parts of the animals, fast food buys other parts of the animals, and retailers buy other parts of the animals. And you really need all three to buy the whole animal and to make it not hideously expensive. But this same company said, we'll do whatever Walmart tells us to do, because they're a big enough customer. And I don't like naming companies because, but Walmart just has different power than the rest of us. And it's a fact. It's a fact that most of us don't like, but in fact, it really is the case. Do we get backlash? Yes, but we try as best possible to turn that backlash into a community conversation. So.
But Tom, the backlash is really growing. I mean, there's two groups now that are raising $30, $40 million, Alliance to Feed the Future and the Cattlemen Association. So they want us to eat more meat and they want us to eat more processed food. I was at an event where this man stood up. It was one of these chemical events where they promote their different pesticides and antibiotics or whatever. And someone said that Michael Pollan, when he had said, eat food from plants, not food that's made in plants, the guy said that he's a little like Al-Qaeda coming up with that kind of a statement. And it was outside of my frame of reference to realize what is going to be coming at us. He was saying, you know, processed food has saved the world. It's cheap, it's whatever. And I think there are alternatives. We can, you know, we've eaten for 10,000 years without processed food. This is all a brand new system, and we're just starting to see the cost of this system. It takes a little time to see what it's really costing us, and it's going to cost us. This cheap food is way too expensive.
This is a perfect example of how the customer, how people get confused. What is the title of this organization you're talking about?
Yeah, they're
the title again.
Alliance to Feed the Future.
Okay, so that sounds like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, that sounds benign too.
And they're coming up with the fact that they were upset by people watching Food Inc. or reading Michael's book, Eric's book, whatever it is, and they're saying, okay, we have to promote farmers. It's all family farms. But the reality is there are very few family farms any longer, but they're going to promote it as such. So it's promoting a myth.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get you guys now to talk about what are the things that you see going on, and they could be small things, but the things that you see going on around in your universes that point to a better future, that seem to show some hopefulness. And why don't we start more on this side of the table with Chris?
One thing that pops to mind is actually going on, or just happened 2 days ago, courtesy of Slow Food. It's a Slow Food $5 challenge, and we're hoping to perhaps extend it after this weekend. But the idea is basically to take the notion of a value meal and encourage people around the country to make food for $5, make a meal for $5, and you can actually do it, and to fight that notion that healthy food, local food, sustainable food has to be expensive, and we can't afford to make this food. So it's sort of taking back the notion of a value meal and encouraging people to make quote-unquote slow food at fast food prices. So we love this idea, and Robbie and I in a project we're working on are trying to hope to encourage this, make this into a national campaign. That's one idea.
Actually, the Latino family in Food Inc. that was eating the Burger King, and the father had diabetes and the young daughter was pre-diabetic. In the last few years since the film, they've started cooking at home because they weren't aware of what this fast food was doing to their health. The father was spending something like $400 a month on diabetes medicine, but they were eating fast food because it was cheap. And they have now started cooking at home, preparing these meals, and the father's medicine has decreased and the young daughter is no longer pre-diabetic. So.
Cool.
All right. Helene, how about you?
Did you? I guess one of the things that really excites me is that, we launched this program 2006, 2007, and it has become so much a part of the culture of our 500 chefs. We have 10,000 people in the units, cooks and dishwashers and so forth, and I can scratch the surface, if you will, of anyone who works for us, and they get the issues. They get it, some of them very, very deeply, and some of them a little bit more surfacey, but it's part of the culture now. And there was nothing really special, no reason why our chefs and our cooks should get it versus others. And I think that there's really a lot of potential for others to get it too. These are complicated issues to some degree. In other ways, they're very simple. There's a huge misinformation, disinformation campaign that is coming our way. A couple of years ago, I debated, I don't know why I agreed to this, I debated a cattle farmer on Fox TV about, whether cows cause global warming. And the cattle farmer said something like, well, my cows don't cause global warming, they eat grass. That's sort of the point, right? I mean, they're cows. But there's just a lot that's coming our way that's much bigger than the backlash we've already seen. And that's why it really, we need to strengthen ourselves and to know what we can know, read the wonderful books and see the wonderful movies, and I think really sort of be steadfast in our support and working together and not knocking ourselves down. Okay, one of the things that I see, and this, I've got to answer the negative thing too, which is I see, when I talk about eating less meat, I have some advocates for pasture-raised meats just hammer me. Now, I believe what they do. I think that's important. But they also need to see that eating less meat as a general rule is a good idea too. Mm-hmm. And so we need to support each other. The vegans need to support the people who are pursuing credible animal welfare standards. And, the meat eaters need to support the vegans. We are a big tent, and we really need to maintain that, and I am beginning to see that, and I'm really encouraged by that.
Jyoti, how about you?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing in terms of a culture. Within our organization, what we've really seen is going from, say, having a sustainability manager who would manage a bunch of projects to having a team of 400 people in our company who are engaged and interested, and they want to know what they can do to help the company improve its environmental performance, whether it's looking at waste on the manufacturing floor or using less energy. And we've really seen a positive sea change culturally of people aware of the issues, wanting to know what they can do to help, and really engaging in how they can affect change day to day within their roles. So that's been really positive for us.
Robbie?
Well, I just, again, echoing this, that there are many spokes to the wheel, and that we have to embrace all these different positions. And I think from the more radical to the more, like we put Walmart as a good guy in Food Inc. I never imagined that we would be doing that, and I think it's wrong for any one company to have that kind of power. But I also think it shows us as consumers, and I think we have to build up the consumer to realize they're going to be the change. Ultimately, Congress is going to be hard to transform. There's just too much money there. But our power of the dollars when we go shopping is what's going to create the change. And we have to figure it out from many different angles, how to bring that about.
Lori?
And I would just add a few things. I would say the explosion of home gardening and gardens at schools. This is, there was a big article in the New York Times, and I really believe that if we don't start growing something ourselves again, we're not going to connect to how hard it is to grow food and what it means and all that. So I think that's a huge trend that is going to continue to explode. Obviously, the explosion of farmers markets. I would also say all the great material that's still coming out. Like, for example, Tomatoland by Barry Estabrook. I recommend everybody read that, and he's speaking today.
He's right there in the
An
audience.
incredible book. Oh, he's here, right? And Forks Over Knives, this great documentary that came out this year. Everybody should see. You should see it with someone you love. And also, I would add to this list Twitter, because even as an advocate myself, I have been blown away by the power of Twitter. And if you care about these issues, if you read an article that you like, if you see a movie you like, if you hear about Nature's Path or a company, you have the power to completely activate your circle. And this is a great tool for us, and I think that's going to help us get to where we need to go to.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we start taking some questions from the audience and hearing from you guys. Right there in the front, gentleman in the front. Is there going to be a microphone going around? Is that how we're going to do it? There should be a microphone. Sure, go ahead.
Good. Actually, this is more of actually a follow-up to something that Ms. York said, which I think is really important, and it's sort of pulling a thread together that's been running through the conversation. Can you all hear me? She mentioned that she was concerned because she was preaching to the choir. But I think it's really clear that you're educating the messengers. And it's a really fundamental difference. Mm-hmm. And I had some experience with a movement like this when, in 1991, I created the world's first smoke-free bar. It was right here in Santa Monica. And the way that I was able to continue educating people, which I did for a long time, another decade, was events like this, but geared toward the proselytizers. And that's really all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
I think that's really well put.
There's a question in the
By
back.
the way, I've found, I've gone around to speak at colleges, and that there's incredible numbers of kids, that it feels like the food movement, which encompasses so many different groups, whether it's people who are concerned about animal welfare or nutrition or the environment, or multiple different interests come together, and it feels like it's it feels like what the civil rights movement was for me when I was a kid, and that people are interested, and that we can galvanize a lot of issues around the food movement, and people are ready to take action, and hopefully we can help encourage that action.
And I'll add something I speak to Lori about is mom power. I think the power of mom, obviously with her hands around the purse and speaking with her kids, and desire for the health and welfare of her family, or dad power, however you want to characterize it, I think is really, really important. And I think we here in this room need to find ways that we can get the message to mom and help mom to make her life easier and more healthful. There's a great promise there.
I think we had a question. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, just a quick comment. One of you used the word externality to talk about what the big corporations are trying to get away from. And I think we just need to be clear what that is. Externalities are pollution and social disruption, and we should just call it what it is when we're talking about it. They are trying to export their costs, and the way they do it is by creating pollution that we then the taxpayers have to clean up, or social disruption by not paying the workers enough, or not taking care of their health benefits, or not supporting the infrastructure that keeps their own businesses going, and leaning on the taxpayers to do that. So those are part of the costs of the cheap food, and I think we need to be clear that those costs are paid by all of us.
Right there, yes.
There's also a microphone in the back.
Okay, maybe we'll go back here first and then up here to the front.
Yeah, this is somewhat a follow-up to the cheap food comment that we just heard. I think a lot of people here remember John Robbins' book, A Diet for New America, when he did the calculations on the 2,500 gallons of water for 1 pound of animal flesh on the plate. I'm looking at running for governor here in California in 2014 as the Green Party candidate, and I would like to put out a vision for the whole state of if we ate a primarily organic and mostly low on the food chain plant-based diet and only animals coming out of full animal welfare, what would be all the indicators on 10 or 12 basic categories, from the externalities to the positives: human health, environmental health, animal economics? And I'm wondering if any of you are familiar with people who might be able to do that sort of research, so we could have a quantifiable look at our state economy and our state health and say, if we were really in this place, this is how much better it would be. We're not going to get there tomorrow. Now we can take some incremental steps. But normally the political process only gives us short-term vision and not something larger. And I'd like to find a way to do that for our state.
I mean, just some facts you come across that, people in Iowa, the rates of cancer go up incredibly when they're spraying their crops. So women who are pregnant, the chance of their baby having cancer go up exponentially. The topsoil is disappearing. How are we going to grow food without topsoil? And our medical costs, when I was a kid, food cost 18% of our paycheck. Today it costs 9%. But our medical costs have gone up from 5% to 18%. So in aggregate, food has become more expensive if you think there's a connection between food and health, and which I do. These costs have become very expensive.
If you're looking for agricultural statistics, the Rodale Institute has done the longest side-by-side comparison of conventional and organic agricultural practices and the effects that it has in water use, in GHG emissions, and carbon sequestration. So I would recommend going to their website. It's a great resource, the Rodale Institute.
And I'll also recommend Center for Liberal Future, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, CLF, Center for Liberal Future. They're an incredible resource for all those issues, and sort of working at the very height, at the top.
Yes.
Did you say Rodale? Rodale, Yep.
No.
R-O-D-A-L-E.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. First word I ever spelled right.
Well, I want to thank you all for the work you're doing. And one of the problems I see is actually, and I have no problem mentioning stores, but like Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, where there's a lot of misinformation around the messaging of organic. And that label is meant to indicate that something is healthier for you, but then when you actually look at the ingredients that are in there, almost everything has soy and gluten and the really cheap crops. And there's a whole layer of people. I was working in an office at one point, and people there thought they were eating healthy food. They would get a frozen meal from Trader Joe, put it in the microwave, and they really thought they were having a great, healthy meal. And I think that that's an area that really needs help, too. I don't know what your experience is
Well,
with that.
obviously, if you're cooking out of Lori's cookbook, you're going to have a much healthier meal than if you have anything that's processed and prepared.
No, but I'm talking about people that work in offices that, want to be able to have a healthy meal, and, that's not the same as cooking at home. And I'm just saying there's a lot of misinformation and incorrect messaging in health food stores.
Yeah, well, how about the word natural, which means nothing, and people, they buy and they say it's natural. It says natural.
But I think that is also part of the problem, because as people pick up on that, it becomes less trustworthy.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a designed effort to keep things confused, and it doesn't come from the Whole Foods as much, or Trader Joe's, as much as from large industry. Like you see, blueberries are a health cure, and there are foods that are advertised with blueberries on the packages, and there are no blueberries in the food they're selling. So I think it starts at a much higher level. It's designed to be confusing, and it trickles down all the way, that we have to figure out who are we. We need clear definitions and true labeling, but it's the large industry that's behind trying not to have it ultimately.
And I think it's also part of our culture right now that we're looking for sort of quick health fixes from food. You know, our company's philosophy is cook from scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we can actually buy so much produce from farmers, because we literally take the whole produce and, you know, cut it up and make stock out of it and the whole thing. But, you know, the more you have processing, you know, unless there's a lot of traceability, and some companies do this very well, but many of them are messaging the health claims that consumers want to hear. And one of the things that we know from survey after survey, that health claims and how it's going to affect somebody personally is going to resonate a lot quicker than the environmental issues or the social factors and how workers were treated. So let's remember that it took 150 years for our food system to get to this point, this dysfunctional point. I hope it doesn't take half as long to get better. I don't think it will take half as long, but it's not going to be done by next Thursday.
Yeah. Mud Variant up here in the front. Is there a microphone?
I don't play drum voice, so I'll project.
Okay.
I want to thank all of the panel for the work you're doing, specifically Mr. Kenner. When my 11-year-old was 9, he saw Food Incorporated, and then he promptly proceeded to pour the milk out in the middle of the living room floor to tell me not to do the non-organic thing ever again. So thank you for that. He's 11 now. He's an amazing kid, totally keeps me on my toes. What's your advice for giving kids the tools to keep their parents on their toes? Because they get it. They're a lot smarter than us. They don't have nearly the bad habits that most adults have. And I think you guys have amazing strategies in your own experiences.
Yeah, but kids are up against a lot because there's billions of dollars of advertising to get kids to buy bad food. So there, you know, industry says it's personal responsibility that we all have to figure out how to eat, and, you know, we shouldn't take the right away from individuals to choose what they want to eat. But they're spending how much? It's $1 billion to market this food for children on television, giving little toys, and basically they're looking for the nag factor to get kids to nag their parents. So one thing we have to do is get rid of this, you know, in this horrendous marketing to brainwash children. And one of the things we wanted to film in Food Inc. is they're actually using MRI machines to study kids' brain waves to figure out, even though they say one thing, they want to figure out what's going on inside their brain to get them to buy this food that's going to make them sick for the rest of their lives. So kids are fabulous, but they're up against a lot, you know, in terms of this marketing that's out there.
I would say something that's fun to do, and I know it's a program that some schools have adopted, is a label reading campaign. So teach your kids how to read labels on products. Get them to understand the ingredients and what they mean. What do the daily nutritional values mean? And you know, help them help you develop guidelines for, based on labels, like what's the best thing for us to choose as a family to eat.
And don't eat dinner watching television.
Yeah.
And that's a really huge piece of it. And involve your kids in cooking dinner, because that's one of the best ways to really educate them and to get them involved in the process, and they'll eat better and they'll eat more, and you'll have a great, wonderful eating memory together. So that's another thing everybody can do. By the way, in terms of television, I think it's something like 8,000 ads a year that kids are exposed to, and 70% of those ads are for the foods you would never want your kids eating. So that's what you're up against. So turn the TV off.
But also you have to make, you know, the question before was, you know, Trader Joe's and Whole Foods in terms of buying food. I think we have to start bringing our food to work with us, and it takes longer, but ultimately we're not going to get it from the stores because if it's processed, it's going to be less healthy. If it has a...
No, you do not know what you're eating unless you make it yourself, period.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how fancy, how good the restaurant, how good... You do not know what's in that food. So the only way to, you know, to opt out of this crazy system and with all these health and environmental problems is to start cooking yourself. And how powerful is that? Right. That's fantastic. Here's something we can actually do. and make a huge difference.
All right, we have a question right there, yes.
Kind of following on what you just said, and for Ms. York, when you have a food management company, have you looked at vertical integration, so you go directly from the farm all the way to the plate through looking at partnerships and being able to own places that are producing your food as a way to kind of look at where your meals are coming from on a larger scale than just a single restaurant or a small organization?
I didn't get the question.
It's hard to hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You're asking about
Actually, if you take your microphone away, it might be easier.
Yeah, perfect. So basically using vertical integration to really fight large factory farms. Have you looked at that and you see some of the challenges or some of the possibilities that arise there?
That's my job all day long, every day. We buy, let's say meats, for instance. We buy from small farmers, we buy from mid-size, and we buy from big guys. And we're in all three of those for a variety of reasons. The small ones because they're doing the right thing by the land, by the animals, by the water systems, by the rural communities, and we want more of that. Problem is they don't exist everywhere around the country. The mid-sized guys, we are really working them to adopt credible, humane standards because they can do it. And eventually they really can compete with the big guys. The chicken industry, for instance, there are 4 companies that own 80% of the market. They have monopoly power in all senses of the oligarchic power, you know what I'm talking about. And how do you compete against them? You have to be a credible size. And those middle guys really can do it, and they can do a much better job. And they can go beyond the definition of natural, you know, which is really not very meaningful when it comes to meat. But the big guys, we haven't given up. And the reason we haven't given up the big guys is that there's got to be somebody at the table with them pushing them. There's got to be somebody saying, you know what, there are large numbers of people in this country that the only way they're going to actually be able to afford some of this protein is through you. And if I'm not here bugging you about antibiotics in the feed, if I'm not arsenic in the feed, about what you do with waste and how you treat rural communities, how you treat animals, how you treat your farm workers, how you treat the workers in the processing plants, who's going to do that? So, you know, we could step away from those guys, but we prefer to engage. And we fight quite a bit. And I find that to be one of the most fun parts of my job.
And I think that's a really important, it's an important point. I mean, I think there's maybe kind of a false dichotomy between, is the goal to get Walmart to change and use its vast power to filter down the chain, or is it to create alternative systems? And I think the answer is very obviously both. And we need Walmart to change, and these big companies and I'm glad to see Bon Appetit in there fighting with those big companies. And that change, I think, is necessary but insufficient. So we need to keep building up, working to build out alternatives while we try to change the ways of these big guys. And on that note, unless anybody has a burning final comment, I think we need to close this up. And Helene has stepped up to the plate.
I just want to make a pitch, and I appreciated your comment following up or re-emphasizing really what I was saying about, you know, educating the messengers, not only singing to the choir. I think it's important. I think we also need to reach out. What I would love to see, especially from my colleagues at the end of the table, all of you actually who have a lot of power to reach people, many of you may too, let's use a little humor. You know, we were talking about civility before and all being under a big tent, but I think one of the ways we need to reach people, and you've all done it, but we need to remind ourselves that this is serious business, that these are very important issues, but if we don't laugh, we may not reach as many people as we could. And I think we want to bring people in and show that we have a sense of humor, and maybe we'll actually be better messengers as a result.
We have one final question.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yes. Is there one?
Okay.
I'm proud of you, Daddy. What are we cooking for dinner tonight?
What was that?
That's my son. And it's going to be a healthy, sustainable, handmade vegetarian feast. hand sculpted.
Well done.
Can we eat with you?
You're all welcome.
All right, well, on that note, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you to the audience as well. And I want you guys to know that right now, right afterwards, there's a book signing going on. Two of our panelists have books, really fantastic books out there. Lori David's got her family dinner book, which I think is really important. And Robbie Kenner has got the Food Inc. book. Is that right? Yeah. The Food Inc. book is out to the left. There's a signing, and I encourage you all to go and buy those books. Thank you very much.